The first way no contact fails with avoidance is when you announce it like a threat. Because the moment your boundary turns into a performance, it stops being a boundary and starts sounding like control. And an avoidant nervous system is wired to react to control with distance, with shutdown, with a decision to protect itself even harder. You might think you're being clear, strong, or finally standing up for yourself, but if your tone carries punishment, emotional pressure, or the energy of, "I'm doing this so you feel what I felt," the avoidant doesn't hear self-respect. They hear emotional pursuit in a different costume. This is how the trap begins. You've been hurt, exhausted, and pushed past the limit. You want them to finally understand the cost of their silence. So you announce no contact with a long message, a dramatic goodbye, an emotional courtroom speech. You list the pain, the disappointment, the betrayal of your trust. You explain that you're leaving so they learn, so they miss you, so they wake up. And your feelings are valid. But the strategy is flawed for this attachment dynamic because avoidants often interpret that kind of message as another moment where closeness is tied to pressure. They don't experience it as a clean boundary. They experience it as a final argument that they must escape to breathe. When you declare no contact like a threat, you also keep yourself emotionally hooked to their reaction. You end up waiting for the apology, the chasing, the panic, the proof that they finally get it. And that waiting is still contact, just internal. You haven't truly stepped out of the cycle. You've just changed your costume inside it. Now your nervous system is still begging for a response, still scanning for evidence of regret. That is why so many people break no contact quickly. Not because they are weak, but because the original announcement was never about healing. It was about impact. Avoidance can sense that energy, and if they return under that energy, it's often not for healthy reasons. It becomes ego-driven, fear-driven, a crisis-driven reconnection where they come back fast because they feel threatened, then retreat again once the threat fades. The cycle resets. You end up with the same pain but now with more confusion because you'll think, they came back? So it meant something. It did mean something. It meant they feared loss for a moment. That's different from being ready for consistent love. Quiet no contact is the opposite of that. Quiet no contact is when you stop negotiating with someone's capacity. You stop trying to win empathy through intensity. You let your behavior be the message. You don't need a speech to justify your boundaries. You don't need their agreement to protect your peace. You don't need the last word. You simply remove your energy from a dynamic that kept costing you your self-worth. This kind of silence is powerful because it is clean. It doesn't carry a hook. It doesn't demand a response. It doesn't try to stage an emotional punishment. It exists for one reason only. Your nervous system needs safety, and the current cycle cannot provide it. That kind of no contact has integrity. You are not disappearing to provoke a chase. You are stepping back to heal your identity. And here's what's important. You don't owe anyone your breaking point speech. Your healing does not require a dramatic exit. Your heart doesn't need to persuade someone to care. A partner who has emotional capacity will feel your absence even without a warning banner. A partner who doesn't have capacity won't suddenly develop it because your goodbye was poetic. If you must say one sentence, keep it simple, respectful, and emotionally neutral. Something like, "I need space to heal. I won't be in contact for a while." That's it. No trial, no threat, no emotional fireworks. This protects you from two dangerous outcomes. The first is them shutting down harder because they feel pushed, and the second is you becoming addicted to their reaction as the proof that your boundary mattered. Because the real purpose of no contact, especially with an avoidant dynamic, is to break the chase, withdraw pattern. When you announce it as a threat, You often keep the chase alive emotionally. When you do it quietly, you remove the fuel. You stop being the bridge that keeps the cycle functioning. You stop rescuing the bond after every silence. You stop teaching the relationship that your love will always cushion their distance. Your dignity is louder than your speeches, and the more you practice that dignity, the more you reclaim your power. You start remembering who you were before you turned love into strategy. You start sleeping better, thinking clearer, wanting less from someone who kept giving you uncertainty as a lifestyle. You rebuild your standards in silence. Not because you're cold, but because you finally understand that love isn't proven by how much you can tolerate. Love is proven by how safe you feel being yourself. So the first mistake is not that you had emotions. The mistake is that you turned no contact into an emotional weapon instead of an emotional boundary. And the moment you shift from trying to make them feel something to trying to make yourself whole again, no contact stops being a gamble. It becomes a reset that protects your heart whether they return or not. No contact fails the second you use it as manipulation, because the energy behind the boundary matters just as much as the boundary itself. If your real intention is, "I hope this makes them chase me," your nervous system will stay tied to their reaction. You'll check the phone. You'll scan their socials. You'll read meaning into silence. You'll turn every hour into a test of your worth. And that is not no contact. That is anxious contact without a message. With avoidance, this is especially dangerous because they can feel pressure even when it's silent. They may not be reading your mind, but they're reading the emotional field you've created. If your no contact is charged with the expectation that they must prove something, it can trigger the same avoidant reflex that made the cycle painful in the first place. They sense a trap. They sense a demand. They sense that your silence is not peace, it's a showdown. And many avoidants respond to that by powering down emotionally even further. Not because they don't care, but because their system interprets it as another version of pursuit. Manipulative no contact also sets you up to break it at the worst moment. Because when you're doing no contact for a reaction, you're not building the inner muscles needed to withstand the emotional withdrawal. You're not healing. You're waiting. That waiting becomes a pressure cooker. You start counting days like you're counting points. You start feeling like if they don't reach out by a certain time, your value is collapsing. So you crack, you send a "just checking in." You send a long emotional update. You reopen access too early. And then you blame yourself for failing, even though the truth is you never used no contact as self-protection. You used it as a lever. The hardest truth is this: you cannot use a boundary as a strategy and still expect it to make you feel safe. A boundary is not a trick. It's a truth you live. It exists to protect your mental health, to interrupt the chase, withdraw cycle, and to give your heart a clean environment where you can breathe again. When you use no contact as manipulation, you keep the emotional economy of the relationship the same. You're still negotiating your worth. You're still offering your peace as currency for their attention. You're still making your healing dependent on their response. What does healthy no contact look like instead? It looks like clean intention. It looks like this internal sentence you repeat when your mind tries to bargain. I am not doing this to control them. I am doing this to restore myself. The moment you anchor there, everything changes. You stop making their reaction the scoreboard. You stop seeing silence as a failure. You stop treating your patience as a performance. You begin to understand that the goal is not to trigger their panic. The goal is to rebuild your standards so you never again confuse inconsistency with love. This is where no contact becomes powerful for avoidant dynamics. Because the avoidant cycle survives on your emotional pursuit. When you pull your energy back with dignity, not drama, you stop feeding the pattern. They no longer get the comfort of distance without consequence. But this only works cleanly if you're not doing it as a threat. The power is not in your silent punishment. The power is in your self-respect becoming non-negotiable. People often ask, but doesn't no contact make them miss you? Sometimes. But that's not the point. Because if the only way someone shows up is when they're afraid of losing you, that still isn't the stable love your nervous system needs. Fear can produce urgency. It cannot guarantee maturity. So if your no contact is a tactic to force a chase, you may successfully trigger a short-term return, but you won't necessarily trigger long-term change. You might get an emotional spike. You might get late-night texts. You might get sweet words. And then the moment you relax, the old distance may return. That's how people get trapped in a loop of intermittent reinforcement, where the avoidant comes back just enough to keep hope alive, but not enough to create real safety. Healthy no contact removes you from that addiction cycle. It re-centers your identity. You stop asking, how do I make them realize? You start asking, what kind of love is actually safe for me? You rebuild your life rhythm. Your sleep improves. Your mind clears. Your self-respect stops negotiating. You remember the version of yourself that wasn't constantly monitoring someone's emotional availability like a fragile stock market. You stop chasing clarity from someone who keeps delaying it, and you begin to prepare for the most important truth of all if they return. Your standards must return first. Because the real win of no contact is not that they come back. The real win is that if they come back, you are no longer the person who will accept crumbs as a meal. You are the person who requires consistency. You are the person who can say, calmly, I'm open to repair, but I won't reopen a cycle. You are the person who no longer needs a chase to feel chosen. Because you've already chosen emotional safety over emotional suspense. Soft contact is one of the most common reasons no contact fails with avoidants, because it keeps your attachment system fed while you're telling yourself you're letting go. You stop texting them, but you still watch their stories. You don't call them, but you check their last scene. You don't meet them, but you ask mutual friends for updates. You don't send a message, but you like a post at midnight hoping they notice. That's not no contact. That's emotional drip feeding. And your nervous system can't detox if you keep giving it tiny doses of the exact person you're trying to heal from. With avoidant dynamics, this is especially dangerous because the chase-withdraw cycle thrives on ambiguity. Soft contact keeps you in ambiguity. It allows the relationship to remain emotionally alive without requiring real change. It keeps you psychologically available while pretending you're stepping back. And it keeps the avoidant comfortable because they can still feel your presence around them without having to face the responsibility of fully showing up. In other words, soft contact protects their pattern and delays your healing. Your heart might say, but I'm only watching stories. Your mind might say, it's harmless. But your body hears something entirely different. Your body hears, this person still has access to my attention. This bond is still open. Every small check-in reactivates your nervous system. That's why the smallest online signals can bring the biggest emotional storms. One story post can trigger a whole night of overthinking. One vague quote they share can become a puzzle you try to solve. One new follow can make you spiral. You end up turning your healing into surveillance, and surveillance is still attachment. Soft contact also makes you break no contact faster. Because you never truly create clean distance. You keep your brain in a state of craving. You keep the emotional wound exposed to the same stimulus that created it. So when the anxious peak hits, Usually early on, you don't have a stable foundation to stand on. You're still emotionally in the room, just hiding behind a screen. That's why so many people collapse and send a message that they later regret. It wasn't a lack of willpower. It was a lack of real separation. There's another layer. Soft contact sends a mixed energy to the avoidant. Avoidants often feel safer when they can maintain control of closeness without fully committing to emotional accountability. If they can still sense your interest through subtle signals, they don't experience true consequence. They don't have to sit with the full reality of your absence. They don't have to question their behavior as deeply. They can tell themselves you're still there, still orbiting, still emotionally accessible. And this reinforces the very pattern you were trying to interrupt. No contact is not about punishing them. It's about breaking the addiction cycle. Because love with avoidance can sometimes become like intermittent reinforcement, a psychological loop where you receive closeness just often enough to stay hopeful, but not often enough to feel secure. Soft contact keeps that reinforcement alive. It keeps you waiting for signs. It keeps you interpreting silence. It keeps you emotionally investing in micro moments instead of building your life in macro stability. Real no contact has one goal: to stop the bleeding long enough for your nervous system to remember what calm feels like. You're not trying to prove that you can survive without them in a dramatic way. You're trying to remove the stimulus so your mind can return to clarity. That's why full detox matters. Muting, blocking, unfollowing, removing chat threads, deleting photos if you need to, not because you're bitter, but because you're serious about healing. You don't recover from a burn by touching the hot surface. Just a little? And if you're thinking, but what if they think I don't care? This is where your self-respect steps in. The point of no contact is not to manage their perception. The point is to rebuild your emotional authority. If someone truly wants to repair with you, they will choose clarity, consistency, and accountability, not rely on algorithmic breadcrumbs to keep you emotionally tethered. Your healing is not supposed to be a marketing campaign for your value. You also need to understand what soft contact is really disguising. It's often the attempt to hold on to hope without risking pain. You want to detach, but you want to keep the door slightly open just in case. But that, just in case, is the slow poison. Because it attaches your peace to uncertainty. It keeps you in the emotional waiting room, and you deserve better than love that requires you to monitor someone's online behavior to feel alive. So if no contact is your path, make it honest. Make it clean. Make it complete. Not because you're trying to win a game, but because you're trying to win your mind back. Your heart doesn't need partial distance. It needs safety. Your nervous system doesn't need subtle signals. It needs silence that heals. And your future self will thank you for choosing the kind of no contact that actually ends the cycle instead of keeping it on life support. Most people don't fail no contact with avoidance because they don't love themselves enough. They fail because they hit the anxious peak and mistake that emotional surge for truth. The days right after separation, especially around day 3 to day 10, can feel like your nervous system is on fire. Your mind starts rewriting history. Your heart starts bargaining. Your body starts craving relief. You suddenly want to send that message that you know might reset the cycle. Not because it's wise, but because your system is desperate to feel regulated. This is the overlooked reality of no contact. It's not just a decision, it's a detox. And detox always comes with a craving phase where your brain tries to convince you that breaking the boundary is the same thing as love. You might think, I just want closure. I just want to say one last thing. I just want to check if they're okay. But what's often happening is simpler and more human. Your anxiety wants a short-term fix. Your attachment system wants its familiar pattern back. The pain of uncertainty is so loud that even a disappointing reply feels better than silence. Avoidant dynamics make this peak even sharper because the relationship likely trained you to chase relief. You experienced emotional distance, then a small return. You experienced confusion, then a brief softness. Your brain learned that discomfort gets soothed when you reach out. That's why no contact feels so unnatural at first. You're not just resisting the person. You're resisting the old pattern inside your body that says, pursue to restore safety. So when day 5 hits and you feel like you can't breathe, that doesn't mean no contact is failing. It means your nervous system is adjusting to a new standard. The pain isn't evidence that you should go back. The pain is evidence that you're finally interrupting the loop that kept you hooked. This is where most people misread their emotions. They interpret craving as destiny. They interpret withdrawal as proof they made the wrong choice. They interpret loneliness as a sign they should compromise their boundaries. But loneliness is not a compass toward unsafe love. It is a signal that your system is learning how to stand without the emotional roller coaster. The most destructive mistake in this phase is impulsive contact. The "I miss you" text. The long paragraph that tries to explain your pain one more time. The late-night voice note. The "just checking in" message that quietly reopens a door you were trying to close for your health. Because once you break no contact during the anxious peak, you don't just restart communication. You restart the entire emotional economy. You teach your brain that this boundary is negotiable whenever you feel distressed. And that makes the next peak harder. That's why you need structure before the peak arrives. You don't wait until you're drowning to build a life raft. You build it early. You decide what you will do when the urge hits. You remove easy access, mute, unfollow, archive chats, delete threads if needed. Not out of anger, but out of wisdom. You replace the old reaching habit with new grounding habits. Go for a walk. Call a friend. Write the message in your notes and don't send it. Set a simple rule: if I feel the urge to contact them, I wait 24 hours. The urge usually shrinks when your body comes down from the adrenaline. You also have to remember that the anxious peak loves to romanticize potential. You start remembering only the best moments. You ignore the exhausting ones. You forget how many times you felt lonely next to someone who wasn't fully present. You forget how often you had to translate silence into excuses. In the peak, your brain becomes a highlight reel editor. So you need a reality anchor. Write down the patterns that hurt you, not to stay bitter, but to stay honest. The mind forgets pain faster than the body does. Your notes help you trust what your nervous system already learned. This phase is also where you stop confusing love with urgency. You might feel, if I don't say something now, I'll lose them forever. But healthy love doesn't require panic. Healthy repair doesn't depend on you breaking your own boundary to prove your devotion. If someone is emotionally safe, they won't need you to chase them during your most fragile days to keep the bond alive. And if they are not emotionally safe, breaking no contact won't fix the pattern. It will only soothe your anxiety temporarily while keeping the cycle intact. The anxious peak is your training ground. It's the moment your self-respect becomes real, not theoretical. Every time you survive an urge without reaching out, you rebuild your emotional authority. You teach your mind that your peace doesn't need their inconsistent presence to exist. You teach your body that stability can be self-generated, and that is the hidden victory of no contact. It doesn't just change how they experience your absence. It changes how you experience your own worth. One of the fastest ways no contact fails with avoidance is when you leave an emotional essay as your goodbye. Because what you think is closure can land in their system as pressure, blame, or a demand for instant emotional competence. Your heart is not wrong for wanting to be understood. Your pain is not wrong for wanting a final voice. But with an avoidant pattern, the delivery often matters more than the intention. Long, detailed messages can trigger the exact reflex you're trying to interrupt, the reflex to shut down, retreat, and protect themselves by emotionally disengaging. When you write a long goodbye, you're usually doing two things at once. You're expressing hurt, and you're hoping your words will finally create a breakthrough. You want them to read your truth and say, "I get it now. I'm sorry. I'm ready." You want your clarity to become their awakening. That desire is deeply human. But here's the problem: if no contact is meant to break the chase, withdraw cycle, a long goodbye can secretly keep the chase alive. It's still you reaching for a response, reaching for emotional resolution, reaching for proof that your love mattered enough to change them. Avoidants often experience emotional intensity as a trap. They might care about you, but when they feel cornered by the magnitude of someone else's pain, their nervous system moves into defense. They can interpret the message as, "I have to fix this right now," or "I'm being judged," or "I'm about to lose control." And instead of leaning into empathy, they detach to survive, not because they're heartless, because their coping style prioritizes emotional escape over emotional repair. So your essay might not produce clarity. It may produce silence, defensiveness, or a cold reply that wounds you even more. There's also another hidden cost. A long goodbye keeps you emotionally tied to your own message. You reread it. You wonder if they understood. You check for reply. You wait for the apology that matches your words. And that waiting becomes a form of self-sabotage. Because now your healing depends on whether the avoidant processes your closure the way you hoped. You've handed them a remote control to your peace at the exact moment you were trying to reclaim it. No contact is not a courtroom speech. It's a nervous system decision. It's you choosing safety over chaos. So when your exit turns into a 12-paragraph explanation, you can accidentally turn the boundary into a performance. You're no longer just stepping away. You're asking them to validate your reasons for stepping away. And if they are avoidant, leaning, they may respond with distance precisely because your message makes the moment feel emotionally heavy. This is why simplicity is power in this dynamic. The cleanest no contact is not the one where you say everything perfectly. It's the one where your actions say what your words no longer need to repeat. You've explained your needs before. You've asked for consistency before. You've tried to repair before. If the pattern continued, the issue was not confusion. The issue was capacity and willingness. Your silence becomes the simplest truth. I won't keep paying for love with my self-respect. If you must say something, let it be short, emotionally neutral, and respectful, something that doesn't invite debate. I need space to heal. I won't be in contact for a while. That sentence protects you. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand emotional performance. It gives your nervous system a clean exit without the hook of expecting a response. And here's the part that can feel uncomfortable. You don't need to be understood to be done. Many people keep writing essays because they want the avoidant to finally admit the truth. But your reality doesn't require their agreement. Your pain doesn't need their permission. Your boundary doesn't need their blessing. You can walk away from a pattern even if the other person still sees themselves as the victim of your standards. A long goodbye can also create a false sense of, "I did everything right." You might believe that the more clearly you explain, the more likely they are to change. But avoidant change is not triggered by a perfect speech. It's triggered by consistent consequences and internal self-awareness. Your essay may be emotionally honest, but it can't substitute for their personal growth. And it certainly shouldn't be the last place you deposit your hope. So if you're about to write that message, pause and ask yourself one question. Is this for my healing or for their reaction? If it's for their reaction, you're still emotionally in the cycle. If it's for your healing, write it in your notes. Write it in a letter you never send. Say it to a friend. Give your truth a safe place to live without tying it to someone who has repeatedly struggled to hold it gently. The highest version of no contact is quiet self-respect. It is you refusing to turn your final boundary into another round of emotional pursuit. It is you choosing a clean exit over a dramatic explanation. Because in the end, the avoidant doesn't need your essay to understand the consequence. The consequence is your absence. And your absence, when it comes with calm dignity, is sometimes the only message that ends the loop for good, not just for them, but for you. No contact fails in a quiet, invisible way when you don't heal the pattern that pulled you into the anxious-avoidant loop in the first place, because then you're not really changing your relationship to them, you're only changing the volume of your access. You can go silent for 30 days, 60 days, even 6 months, but if you return with the same nervous system, the same self-abandoning habits, the same fear of loss, you will recreate the same dynamic with a new hope, and the avoidant will slip right back into the same comfort zone they had before. The biggest misunderstanding people have is thinking no contact is a spell. Like if you disappear long enough, the avoidant will magically transform into a consistent, emotionally present partner. But no contact isn't magic. It's a mirror. It reveals what you tolerate, what you chase, and what you finally refuse to keep paying for. And if you don't use that time to rebuild your internal foundation, you end up using no contact as a pause button rather than a transformation phase. Because the real issue with avoidant dynamics isn't only their distance, it's the dance your nervous system has learned to do around that distance. Over-explaining, over-giving, over-accommodating, making your needs smaller so they don't feel pressured. Treating inconsistency like a temporary glitch instead of a pattern. You become an emotional negotiator, constantly trying to phrase your heart in a way they can handle. And that may have started with love, but it often ends with self-erasure. So when you enter no contact, the real work isn't just silence, it's identity recovery. It's learning how to feel safe without performing for someone's attention. It's building a self-worth that doesn't collapse when an avoidant goes quiet. It's learning to stop interpreting mixed signals as hidden depth. It's learning to choose evidence over fantasy. If you don't do that, no contact becomes a temporary detox that you ruin by returning to the same emotional addiction. You'll be pulled back by the first breadcrumb. A late night, I miss you. You'll feel that familiar surge of hope, and because you haven't rebuilt your standards, your heart will accept the minimum as if it's the maximum. That's how the cycle restarts. And avoidance, even the good-hearted ones, do not change because you suffered quietly. They change when the emotional ecosystem changes. When your boundaries are real. When your availability has structure. When your standards are consistent. When they realize access to you is no longer automatic after distance. This isn't about punishing them. It's about protecting the relationship from becoming a one-person emotional rescue mission. No contact done correctly should make you less reactive, not more hopeful in a fragile way. It should make you calmer, clearer, stronger. It should help you stop romanticizing their potential and start respecting your reality. You should come out of no contact with a new internal rule: I will not return to confusion. I will only return to clarity. I will not return to inconsistency. I will only return to consistent effort. I will not return to promises. I will only return to patterns. This is the part people often avoid because it's uncomfortable. Healing means confronting your own attachment wounds too. Why you stayed in emotional scarcity. Why you kept explaining your pain to someone who kept delaying repair. Why part of you believed that love had to be earned through endurance. Why your self-worth got tied to being chosen by someone emotionally unpredictable. These are not shame questions. These are freedom questions. Because when you heal your side of the pattern, you become harder to pull back into chaos. You don't respond to breadcrumbs. You don't accept vague returns. You don't mistake panic for transformation. You don't feel guilty for having standards. You stop believing that you're calm. Stable needs are too much. You start viewing emotional consistency as the baseline, not the reward. Your no-contact time should be used to rebuild your life rhythm and identity outside the cycle. New habits. Better sleep. A stronger social circle. Projects that remind you who you are. Therapy or self-education on attachment. Journaling that tracks patterns, not just feelings. A written list of the behaviors you will not accept again. This is not about becoming cold. This is about becoming loyal to your future. Because the truth is, the avoidant dynamic doesn't only break hearts. It can rewrite your self-concept if you're not careful. It can teach you to doubt your instincts. It can teach you to settle for uncertainty. It can teach you to equate anxiety with love. No contact is your chance to unlearn that. So the real success of no contact isn't that they come back. The real success is that if they come back, you are no longer the version of yourself who will reopen the same wound. You become someone who can love deeply without leaving yourself behind, someone who can hold compassion without sacrificing clarity. Someone who understands that the point of boundaries is not to control another person, but to protect the part of you that finally decided your heart deserves a love that doesn't require you to disappear to be valued.